I am Evelyn, 30 years old, and I wish to disclose a concealed past that I have suppressed for many years due to its profound pain and difficulty in acceptance. Life presents unforeseen events that can irrevocably alter our existence. I never anticipated enduring anguish stemming from a truth that remains challenging to acknowledge. My narrative does not revolve around love or family. Happiness, as people often think, but rather about sacrifices and hidden emotions. People say that love is the only reason two people get married, but in the case of my mother and stepfather, I knew that was not true the first time he appeared. I felt something was off, and gradually I realized that my mother was just an excuse. I was the real reason he married her. Make sure to subscribe to my channel so I can continue bringing you more fascinating true stories like this one. And don't forget to watch this video till the end because the story is going to be incredibly interesting. My mother Ella owned a small fashion boutique after my father passed away when I was young. She raised me and took care of me until I became an adult with her resilience and determination. She not only took care of our lives but also transformed her fashion store into a beloved place in our community. My mother has always been a model of strength and independence in my eyes. Life went on steadily and peacefully, and my mother continued to work. I worked diligently at the boutique while concentrating on my studies. As time progressed, I entered a transitional phase upon commencing university. It was the first instance I felt I had genuinely liberated myself from my mother's protective influence and ventured into the broader world. The initial days of university introduced numerous novel experiences. One day, I encountered Mr. Thomas, who was both my teacher and my stepfather. Mr. Thomas, a philosophy lecturer, captivated me with his teaching style from the very first day of class, enhancing my understanding of the subject and altering my perspective on life. Our post-class discussions became more frequent, revealing his significant influence on me. However, I gradually sensed something peculiar in his gaze when he looked at me. Initially, I dismissed it as mere imagination, but as time progressed, this sensation intensified. There were instances when he regarded me not merely as a teacher to a student, but with a profound gaze that suggested unspoken sentiments. This gaze conveyed intimacy and a silence laden with hidden meanings, leading to my discomfort each time it manifested. I found myself perplexed. It was unsettling. The gaze I was accustomed to transformed into one that appeared to scrutinize me, as if anticipating a response I could not comprehend. Although I questioned whether I was overanalyzing the situation, the peculiarity was undeniable. As time progressed, not only did I observe Mr. Thomas's unsettling gaze, but I also noted his peculiar behavior whenever I spoke or passed by. He would position himself closer to me, occasionally placing his hand on my shoulder in a manner that induced discomfort. Initially, these gestures seemed innocuous, yet they grew oppressive, particularly when he retained me after class to discuss the lecture. This conversation diverged from our previous exchanges. He not only addressed the subject matter but also appeared intent on prolonging our interaction. His unwarranted scrutiny and intimacy left me feeling suffocated. I no longer felt the respect and distance that should exist between teachers and students. Gradually, I didn't dare to see him as much as before. I made up excuses to avoid private conversations after school. When he offered to help, I could only refuse, claiming I was busy, but in my heart, I just wanted to maintain my distance. I tried to sit further away in class, limit eye contact, and sometimes even go to school late to avoid seeing him before class. I thought that if I avoided Mr. Thomas, everything would be fine if I didn't have to face those strange looks and actions. Maybe I could forget the anxiety that surged inside me for the rest of the school year. I tried to avoid seeing him again. Everything seemed to return to normal when I kept my distance, and I thought all the trouble was over. However, I didn't expect that the safety I created for myself was only temporary. After a year of school, when I returned home, I noticed something different about my mother. She was more cheerful than usual. Her eyes sparkled whenever she spoke, and sometimes she would laugh quietly to herself as if hiding a special happiness. I began to wonder. But my mother just said she was very happy. As circumstances improved, one afternoon my mother and I sat in the living room. She suddenly sat down next to me, her face radiant and her eyes shining with unrestrained joy. She began to share something important. She had met someone special, someone she wanted to introduce to me, Seeing the happiness evident in her every gesture, my heart also felt light. For so many years my mother had raised me alone, sacrificing her own joys to devote all her energy to my care. I felt relieved that she had finally found the joy and happiness she deserved. The day my mother prepared to introduce that man to me, I was very much looking forward to it. The house was neatly arranged, and the dining table was carefully set by my mother. I could see the excitement and joy in her eyes, and I hoped this man would bring her the comfort and happiness she had been searching for all this time. When the doorbell rang, my heart fluttered. Mom quickly went to open the door while I stood waiting in the living room, imagining the man who would come into her life. When the door opened and I saw that the man who entered was Mr. Thomas, my heart filled with an indescribable shock. I stood still, unable to believe my eyes at all the uneasiness I had felt about him, and suddenly rushed back, enveloping me. The man my mother loved, the man she had introduced me to with such trust and happiness, was the man I had been trying to avoid all this time. A series of conflicting thoughts exploded in my head. Why him? When did they become acquainted? Did he indeed? Any intense caused a sudden surge of unease in my heart, as recollections of his peculiar glances and disconcerting movements inundated my mind, obstructing clear thought. I turned to my mother. She sought a sign that she acknowledged the peculiarity of the situation yet remained entirely oblivious, smiling contentedly as she introduced Thomas, as if all was well in her heart. This was merely the introduction of a man she adored, unaware that Thomas's presence was inciting turmoil within me. Mr. Thomas entered, still smiling serenely. Exuding friendliness and politeness, he greeted me with feigned surprise, expressing disbelief at my identity as my mother's daughter. I attempted to reciprocate his surprise, yet internally I was in turmoil. My mother, oblivious to my inner conflict, laughed and expressed delight upon learning that Thomas was my teacher. The two engaged in cheerful conversation about this unforeseen coincidence, while I stood by, enveloped in insecurity. I incessantly questioned the true nature of Mr. Thomas and the reason for his emergence in my mother's life in a role distinct from my prior knowledge of him. Was this genuinely a coincidence, or was there an obscured truth that eluded my perception? From that day forward, life continued as usual. As per usual, there were no peculiar indications from Thomas that elicited concern, and his bond with my mother deepened, their emotions appearing entirely organic. I observed my mother exhibiting unprecedented happiness, characterized by frequent smiles and a radiant demeanor. Shortly thereafter, my mother opted to remarry, and Thomas was formally integrated as my stepfather. Everything transpired seamlessly. No anomalies occurred, and our familial existence remained tranquil and stable. As time passed and there were no strange signs, I began to feel that I was thinking too much. Perhaps my initial worries were just due to the stress of facing the changes in my mother's life and my own seeing Mom happier every day. I gradually let go of my doubts and insecurities, seeing my mother smiling brightly with Thomas. I realized that the most important thing was that she had found the happiness she deserved. Finally, I accepted their relationship and gave them my blessing. From the bottom of my heart, I hoped that my mother would continue to live in that joy, and I also learned to accept Thomas as a part of our family as time passed. I did not see any unusual signs in Thomas as I had worried. I gradually blamed myself for thinking too much and letting unfounded worries affect me. Seeing my mother increasingly happy with Thomas the first also felt relieved. Finally, I felt happy for my mother and sincerely wished her well, hoping her life would always be filled with joy and happiness. At that time, I thought that everything would just continue peacefully. A considerable duration elapsed without any atypical indications from Thomas, and I eventually experienced a sense of reassurance. I no longer harbored qualms or doubts regarding my stepfather, as he had always demonstrated his goodness by caring for my mother and our family. I really thought that my prior apprehensions were only products of my sensitivity and imagination. At the age of 22, I graduated. After graduating from university, I began my search for my first job. Although I had not yet secured a suitable position, I chose to assist my mother at her boutique, allowing us to spend more time together. Thomas frequently visited the store, offering help with minor tasks during his free time. Everything was proceeding smoothly, and I had no lingering doubts about Thomas. I genuinely believed he was a loving husband to my mother and had integrated into my life. However, on what became the worst day of my life, everything changed. I was unwell that day. The fever left me fatigued, preventing me from accompanying my mother to the store as usual. She advised me to remain home and rest, which I did not do. I did not consider it significant that just my stepfather, Thomas, was home with me that day due to his lack of obligations to go out. Initially, I had no concern or suspicion. After years of cohabitation, I perceived him as a reliable individual who deeply cared for my mother. As I lay in my room attempting to soothe myself to sleep and escape the anguish and exhaustion induced by the fever, that tranquility was short-lived. The unforeseen transpired that very day in the domicile I once regarded as the safest haven. Thomas entered the room bearing a glass of water and some pills, asserting they were analgesics to alleviate my fever. Descend more rapidly. His tone was soothing and benevolent, devoid of any cause for mistrust. The fever had caused my mind to whirl, and I did not contemplate it much. I only desired to recover and obtain some rest. Thus, I ingested the tablets. I consumed the substances he provided without hesitation and drank the water, oblivious to the impending turmoil. At that point, everything appeared normal and I failed to perceive any anomalies. After finishing the drink, I had no immediate effects. Uncharacteristically, the medication did not manifest its effects immediately, and I remained acutely aware of my environment. I lay there silently, anticipating that the temperature would soon diminish. Instead, after around 20 minutes, circumstances began to alter. Thomas re-entered the room devoid of medicine or drink, and a troubling expression lingered in his eyes. However, when attempting to sit, I was astonished to discover my body had become immobile. A sensation of paralysis enveloped me as if all my power had been siphoned away, inducing a state of terror. I attempted to fortify myself against this sense of powerlessness. However, I could only lie there, eyes wide open, as Thomas drew nearer, his demeanor composed. However, his eyes glimmered with an intensity that instilled a chill within me. I endeavored to move, yet my body felt utterly immobilized. Not a single digit would respond, and the ensuing helplessness terrified me. This fear escalated further as he leaned closer, his face mere inches from mine, and smiled. His smile had transformed from friendly and gentle to menacing and frigid. He then whispered, his voice soft yet distinctly audible, "I have awaited this opportunity." For an extended period, I was appalled, unable to fathom what I had just heard. My mind was in turmoil, struggling to grasp the unfolding events, yet everything appeared to disintegrate at that moment. The anxieties and uncertainties that had previously plagued me suddenly materialized, and the nightmare I had presumed to be mere imagination had transformed into reality. Thomas seated himself beside me, his gaze calculating and his smile malevolent. I lay there, powerless to move or resist, relegated to passively absorbing his every word. Each sentence resonated distinctly, gradually unveiling a horrifying truth I had never contemplated. He commenced by articulating that ever since I commenced my college education, he had harbored feelings for me. He had always desired to establish a connection with me, seizing every opportunity to approach, yet he observed my consistent reluctance to engage. His efforts to connect were thwarted by my avoidance, prompting him to adopt an alternative strategy to infiltrate my life. Thomas commenced an investigation into my personal information and background. Upon discovering details about my mother and our familial circumstances, he concluded that the most effective means to get closer to me was by forming a relationship with her. He gradually earned her trust effortlessly, and before I realized it, he had become my mother's husband, assimilating into my family life. Hearing those explanations plunged me into profound despair. I could scarcely believe that everything surrounding me had been so meticulously orchestrated. What I had perceived as normal, the happiness of my mother, was revealed to be merely a facade, aimed ultimately at drawing closer to me, causing me immense anguish. Upon the realization that every aspect had been orchestrated by him from inception to conclusion, I felt a profound sense of revulsion. After concluding his discourse, Thomas advanced towards me, his eyes brimming with satisfaction as he observed my inert form on the bed. I was utterly powerless as he approached. His gaze, devoid of the tenderness my mother had perceived, was now avaricious and frigid. I attempted to retreat, yet every movement appeared futile. My heart raced, but my body felt immobilized, resisting my will. Thomas leaned down, his hands gliding over me, evoking an inescapable sense of revulsion. He exerted control over my body mercilessly, leaving me paralyzed, acutely aware of each moment he seized from me, seconds stretching into eternity. All I could do was wish for it to conclude, but he persisted. The world around me seemed to disintegrate, as all the individuals I had known were forcibly removed by him. I yearned to resist, to retaliate, but it was utterly futile. Thomas continued unabated. My body no longer belonged to me. Time elongated interminably, each second morphing into a nightmare devoid of escape as I lay there, powerless and gazing at the ceiling in an attempt to evade reality. I experienced a gradual and agonizing unfolding of events, while the sensation of paralysis and loss of control intensified my terror. With each second, each minute, and every action he took, every touch seemed like an assault on my self-esteem and dignity. Fragments of my identity disintegrated without any means of halting it. I sensed that my body no longer belonged to me. I was entirely dominated by him. Everything transpired at a sluggish pace. I could only lie there, engulfed in horror, with no means to resist. Each second felt interminable, and I only wished for it all to conclude. Upon its conclusion, I reclined, experiencing a profound emptiness and numbness, while the room appeared frigid. Oppressed and devoid of vitality, Thomas rose to his feet. He adjusted his attire as if nothing had transpired, but I remained still, unable to evade the trauma I had just endured. I sensed my entire existence unraveling. All that I once knew and believed dissipated into insignificance as my mind became inundated with reverberating questions laden with anguish and fury. I struggled to comprehend the rationale behind the events. How could the individual my mother cherished, whom I endeavored to accept as a familial figure, inflict such harm upon me? The amalgamation of pain, fear, and betrayal enveloped me, rendering me suffocated and bereft of hope. Thomas cast a final, frigid glance in my direction before departing, leaving me to grapple with the anguish, torment, and burgeoning obsession that plagued my thoughts. I was at a loss as to how to confront this reality or persist in living when everything appeared to have irrevocably unraveled. Gradually, as the effects of the drug diminished, I sensed a semblance of control returning to my body. Although still feeble and lightheaded, I attempted to rise. Each movement elicited anguish, although I understood my subsequent course of action. My hands trembled as I attempted to adjust my attire. In an effort to conceal the remnants of the trauma I had just endured, I surveyed the room, my gaze fixating on the phone resting on the table. It was my sole means of seeking assistance to terminate this ordeal. With wobbly steps, I approached, my hands still trembling as I grasped the phone. I called 911, each digit becoming increasingly arduous until the operator's voice emerged. I inhaled deeply, striving to maintain a calm voice and express everything. The police arrived within seconds. However, to me, the burden felt like an eternity as they entered the house silently. Fragmented words echoed, footsteps quickened, and ultimately, Thomas was apprehended. He did not struggle. He only lowered his head. As the police handcuffed him, he remained silent, seemingly aware that it was over. My mother returned shortly after Thomas's arrest and found me trembling and weak beside the officers. Initially, she did not comprehend the situation. When I met her gaze, all my strength dissipated. I could no longer contain my emotions. Tears cascaded down my face as I revealed everything, my voice faltering as I recounted the truth about Thomas, his actions, and the trauma I had suffered. My mother was stunned, her eyes wide with confusion and pain. She didn't say anything the whole time I spoke. She just stood there as if her whole world had collapsed when I finished. My mother collapsed, Sobbing in utter grief and regret, she blamed herself for not realizing what was wrong, and for bringing someone like Thomas into our lives. In her pain, she repeated one sentence over and over: I'm sorry, but I knew that no apology could ever erase the pain we were feeling that day. Changed everything forever. My mother could never forgive herself, and I could never return to the way my life was before. After the police arrested Thomas, a part of me felt relief. But the pain and hurt did not fade immediately. I had achieved justice for myself. I had bravely faced what he had done. But that did not mean the haunting would disappear. My mother, after hearing the whole truth, sank into a deep state of regret. She couldn't stop blaming herself for letting Thomas into our lives and for not recognizing his true nature. She decided to leave the house we shared and closed the boutique for a while to find peace of mind. Thomas was convicted, and I knew I would never see him again. But that was not enough to heal the wounds in my heart. He had ruined a part of my life, and no matter how much time passed, the pain remained like a scar that would never heal from these horrific events. I learned that silence is never the answer to pain, or fearlessly facing the truth, no matter how painful it is the only way to find peace of mind. Silence and perception will only prolong the pain. I recognized that my mother's trust in Thomas and me, despite her ignorance of the situation, had unexpected repercussions. Communicating feelings and thoughts with loved ones is crucial. Had I possessed the courage to voice my concerns about Thomas when I sensed something amiss, perhaps the outcome would have been different. The situation would not have escalated to this point. Despite Thomas's punishment and my mother's acknowledgement of her error, our lives did not revert to normalcy. I had to learn to coexist with the anguish stemming from past traumas and seek solace from deep-seated wounds. My mother, too, must learn to forgive herself. The situation remains unresolved, and the future is uncertain. However, one certainty prevails. I will no longer remain silent. I will persist in my journey forward, regardless of the challenges ahead. Regret and pain may accompany me, yet I recognize that I have embarked on a path of healing. Although this journey is arduous and protracted, I refuse to remain a victim of silence. I will rediscover my identity and reclaim the strength lost in that ordeal.